Welcome to Go and Grow. What do you see? A broken pot? A mistake? A loss? An ending? Most people look at the broken pieces, the cracks, the damage, the disruption. But what if the breaking wasn't the tragedy? What if the breaking was the beginning? For a season, this plant lived inside this pot. It was protected here. It was watered here. It was sustained here. But it was also confined here. The pot was never the destination, it was only the starting place. And eventually, what once supported growth began to restrict it. Look closely. The plant isn't dying, it's trying to become. It's reaching, stretching, pushing against limitations, refusing to stay small. Now, look beyond the pot, past the broken pieces, past what was comfortable, past what was familiar. There is an entire field, a field filled with life, opportunity, possibility, and growth. The tragedy is not that the pot broke. The tragedy would be spending an entire lifetime believing the pot was all there was. How many people are living beneath their potential because they are afraid to leave what is familiar? How many dreams remain dormant because comfort became a cage? How many gifts will never be shared with the world because fear convinced someone to stay where they had already outgrown? Growth is rarely convenient, comfortable, and often requires leaving behind what no longer fits: a job, a mindset, a relationship, an expectation, a version of yourself. Every living thing was created to grow, and yet every day people choose confinement over possibility, familiarity over purpose, safety over expansion. But not everyone. Some people hear the call, some people take the risk, some people step beyond the boundaries of what they've always known. And when they do, they discover something remarkable. The field was always there, waiting, calling, inviting. This is not a story about what was lost. This is a story about what becomes possible when people find the courage to grow. Welcome to Go and Grow. Chapter 1. My pot was too small. My name is LaShanda Loughridge. I was born and raised in Houston, Texas, and at 44 years old, I can honestly say that it took me nearly half of my adult life to discover who LaShanda really was. For years, I searched for validation in places that were never meant to define my worth. I compared myself to other people. I measured my success against theirs. I studied how they talked, worked, and lived, believing that if I could become more like them, maybe I would finally feel like enough. But while I was busy trying to become someone else, I never gave myself permission to become me. I often felt less than, not smart enough, not talented enough, not qualified enough, not worthy enough. These thoughts followed me into every area of my life, including my career. When I became an educational diagnostician, I was excited, but I quickly became overwhelmed. I constantly compared myself to seasoned professionals and questioned whether if I belonged. I wanted approval, recognition, and someone to tell me I was doing a good job. And then one day, something clicked. I realized my credentials were the same as theirs: the same certification, the same master's degree, the same qualifications. The difference wasn't my ability, the difference was my confidence. Over the years, I changed districts, hoping that a different environment would make everything easier. Some places offered incredible mentorship and support, others were far more difficult. But no matter where I worked, one truth remained: the work was always demanding. There was always another evaluation, another deadline, and another family needing help. Changing locations didn't change the nature of the work. Then life happened. I personally experienced loss. I celebrated milestones with my children. I carried responsibilities at home while trying to meet impossible expectations at work. Eventually, my health began to fail. What started as a medical concern led to major surgery and was one of the hardest seasons of my life. During my recovery, I learned a lesson that changed me forever. I had tied my identity to my productivity. Somewhere along the way, I allowed my profession to determine my value. When I couldn't produce, I questioned my worth. But God was teaching me something greater. My value had never been found in my title, not in my performance, not in someone else's approval. It had always been found in Him. That season forced me to establish a promise with myself. Never again would I shrink to fit spaces I had already outgrown. Never again would I allow a job, a title, a relationship, or another person's opinion to determine my worth. If there's one thing I've learned, it is this: you cannot grow while constantly trying to earn permission to exist. Today, I know something that took decades to learn. I am worthy. I belong in every room my gifts make space for, not because someone validated me or approved of me, but because I finally learned to approve the woman God created me to be. And that was the beginning of my growth. Chapter 2: The Lie I Believed. Anxiety has a way of making prisons out of possibilities. It whispers things that sound true. You are not good enough. You're going to fail. You are not qualified. You are not worthy. People are judging you. You're behind. You're too old. You're not enough. The scary part is that after hearing those messages long enough, you stop questioning them and you start believing them. I know because I did. There was once a time in my life when anxiety and depression convinced me that every disappointment was evidence that I was a failure. My marriage ended. Friendships changed. Relationships were lost. Parenting became difficult. I didn't get every job I wanted. Doors closed. Plans changed. Dreams were delayed. And somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing those things as experiences and started seeing them as proof. Proof that I wasn't enough. Proof that I wasn't successful. Proof that somehow I had failed at life. But the truth was much deeper than that. I hadn't failed. I had simply experienced failure. There's a difference. A failed marriage does not make you a failure. A lost friendship does not make you a failure. A rejected application does not make you a failure. A difficult season of parenting does not make you a failure. A closed door does not make you a failure. Yet, anxiety has a way of collecting evidence and building a case against your worth. It takes isolated moments and turns them into an identity. And that's exactly what happened to me. I wasn't struggling because I had failed. I was struggling because I believed I was a failure. That belief affected everything: the way I viewed myself, the way I viewed opportunities, relationships, and my future. I became my own biggest obstacle. My life was not going to change until I changed the way I saw myself. That realization led me to seek help. This is where mental health professionals became important in my journey. I scheduled a counseling session. What I thought would be a conversation about my circumstance became an excavation of my beliefs. We dug deeper past the divorce, past the disappointments, past the career struggles, past the heartbreak, past the fear, past the anxiety, and eventually we arrived at the root. The root wasn't failure, the root was identity. Somewhere along the way, I had allowed life's experiences to define who I was. I confused what happened to me with who I was. And they are not the same thing. The moment I understood that, changed everything. I began to see myself differently. I began to extend grace to myself. I began to understand that worthy people fail. Successful people fail. Strong people fail. Resilient people fail. Failure is an event, it is not an identity. The truth is, I was worthy before I succeeded. I was worthy when I struggled. I was worthy when I made mistakes. I was worthy when the doors closed. I was worthy when people left. I was worthy when I doubted myself. And so are you. If anxiety has convinced you that your setbacks defined you, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not your divorce. You are not your disappointment. You are not your rejection. You are not your mistakes. You are not your worst season. You are not your failures. You are not what has happened to you. You are who God created you to be. And until you believe that, it will be difficult to grow because growth begins the moment you stop seeing yourself through the lens of your pain and start seeing yourself through the lens of your purpose. Chapter 3: The Audacity to Try. What is something you've always wanted to do but didn't think you were good enough to do? Think about it. Not what someone else wanted for you, not what seemed practical, not what felt safe. What did you want? Maybe you wanted to go back to school. Maybe you wanted to start a business. Maybe you wanted to write a book. Maybe you wanted to apply for a position that felt beyond your reach. Maybe you wanted to travel. Maybe you wanted to lead. Maybe you wanted to love again. But instead of taking the first step, you started negotiating with yourself. You told yourself you weren't ready. You weren't qualified. You didn't have enough experience. You didn't have enough money, enough support, or enough confidence. And before long, the dream became smaller. Not because it wasn't possible, but because fear convinced you not to try. Fear has a way of making failure seem permanent. It convinces us that one rejection means never. One setback means impossible. One disappointment means quit. But that's not how growth works. Every person you admire has failed. Every successful entrepreneur has failed. Every great leader has failed. Every athlete and author has failed. Every person who achieves something meaningful has experienced rejection. The difference is they tried again. They understood something many people never learn. Failure is information. Failure is instruction, redirection, and it is not identity. You will either win or you will learn. But either way, you grow. The real tragedy is allowing fear to stop you from trying because every abandoned dream, because of fear, remains forever unanswered. So let me encourage you. Apply for the job. Start the business. Go back to school. Write the book. Launch the podcast. Take the trip. Introduce yourself. Take the chance. Because growth requires movement, and movement requires courage, not the absence of fear. The decision to move anyway. People who were willing to risk disappointment and to discover what was possible on the other side of fear. And because they did, their lives changed. The question is, what could you change in your life if you finally had the audacity to try? Chapter 4: When Comfort Becomes a Cage. Comfort isn't the enemy. In fact, comfort can be a gift. After a difficult season, comfort can feel like peace. After surviving heartbreak, comfort can feel like healing. After years of instability, comfort can feel like home. There is nothing wrong with enjoying the blessings you've worked so hard to receive. The danger begins when comfort becomes permission to stop growing. Think about the plant. The pot wasn't hurting it. It was watering it, protecting it, holding it together, until one day, the very thing that once supported its growth became the thing restricting it. That's how life works. Sometimes the job that once challenged you begins to limit you. Sometimes the relationship that once strengthened you begins to weaken you. Sometimes the routine that once gave you stability begins to steal your curiosity. And sometimes success itself becomes the reason you stop reaching for what's next. Comfort has a quiet voice. It doesn't demand your attention, it simply whispers, "You're fine. Don't risk it. Stay here. You've come this far. Why change now?" Before you know it, days become years, years become decades, and the life you imagined slowly becomes the life you settled for. Not because you couldn't grow, but because you stopped believing you needed to. One of the greatest lessons I've learned is this: growth often requires giving up something that's good to make room for something that's greater. Not because the good thing was bad, but because it was no longer where you were meant to stay. There are people watching this and listening to this who know exactly what I'm talking about. You can feel it. You've outgrown the environment, you've outgrown the conversation, you've outgrown the fear. You've outgrown the version of yourself that keeps apologizing for wanting more. Yet something keeps pulling you back. Sometimes it's familiarity. Sometimes it's loyalty. Sometimes it's guilt. Sometimes it's fear of disappointing people or the comfort of knowing exactly what tomorrow will look like. But here's the question: is your comfort helping you grow, or is it keeping you from becoming? Because there's a difference between being comfortable and being fulfilled. There's a difference between existing and living. There's a difference between surviving and flourishing. Some people stay because they are waiting until they feel ready. But growth rarely begins with certainty. It begins with courage: the courage to have difficult conversations, the courage to walk away, the courage to begin again, the courage to believe that there is more beyond what you can currently see. The field is calling you because you've grown, and growth always creates new space. Maybe today your cage isn't made of fear, maybe it's made of comfort. Maybe your greatest obstacle isn't what happened to you. Maybe it's the life you've become comfortable settling for. So ask yourself, where in my life have I mistaken comfort for purpose? Where have I become so comfortable that I've stopped growing? And what would happen if I finally found the courage to step into the field? Because the goal was never to stay in the pot forever. The goal was always to grow. Chapter 5: The Cost of Growth. No one talks about the cost of growth. We celebrate the success. We applaud the breakthrough. We admire the confidence. But very few people ask, what did it cost you to become this person? Growth has a cost. Not because growth is bad, but because becoming someone new often requires leaving something behind. Sometimes you leave behind places, people, habits, and an old version of yourself. My journey has been costly. Growth cost me a marriage. It cost me relationships. It cost me friendships. It has cost me comfort, financial stability at times. It has cost me certainty. It has cost me the approval of people that I thought would always support me. There were moments when I questioned whether it was worth it. Moments when staying would have been easier. Moments when familiarity looked more appealing than faith. Moments when I wondered if I should just settle. But then I asked myself a different question: what is the cost of not growing? What would it cost me to stay in places that no longer align with who I was becoming? What would it cost me to continue seeking validation from people who couldn't determine my worth? What would it cost me to keep shrinking so other people could remain comfortable? What would it cost me to ignore the dreams God placed in my heart? Suddenly, I realized something. Staying has a price too, sometimes an even greater one. Staying can cost you your peace, your confidence, your purpose, your health, your joy, your voice, and your future. The truth is, every decision costs something. Leaving costs something, staying costs something, speaking up costs something, remaining silent costs something. The question isn't whether you'll pay a price. The question is, which price are you willing to pay? I chose growth, not because it was easy or I knew exactly what would happen next, but because I finally understood that my future deserved more than my fear. There are some days that I cry, some days I question myself and feel lonely, some days I wonder if I made the right decision. Growth does not erase those emotions, it teaches you to keep walking through them. And here's what I've discovered: every time I released something that no longer fit my purpose, I created space for something that did. Not immediately or effortlessly, but faithfully. Sometimes you're holding on to something because you've invested years into it: a relationship, a career, a dream that has changed, an identity you've outgrown. You're afraid that if you let it go, all those years will have been wasted. Let me encourage you. The years were not wasted. They prepared you, they taught you, they strengthened you, they gave you wisdom for the season you're stepping into. Growth doesn't erase your past, it builds upon it. So don't be afraid of the cost. Be more afraid of spending your entire life paying for a version of yourself that no longer exists. Yes, growth may cost you, but remaining confined will cost you even more. The field didn't promise that the journey would be easy, it promised there would finally be room to grow. Chapter 6: Adversity has potential. Most people see adversity as an obstacle. I've learned to see it as a teacher. No one asks for adversity. No one prays for disappointment. No one hopes for rejection. But sometimes the greatest lessons in our lives are learned in seasons we never would have chosen. I remember preparing for one of the most difficult seasons of my life. My marriage was ending, and I was searching for a position that would better support my family. I was offered a teaching position in a district where I had once worked. It was a good opportunity, but accepting it would have meant taking a $10,000 pay cut at the time. At that point of my life, it simply wasn't possible. So, with gratitude and respect, I declined. Not everyone will understand your decisions, and not everyone is meant to. That season taught me the importance of boundaries. There's a difference between being friendly and becoming too personal. There's a difference between working with people and expecting everyone to understand your journey. Professional relationships deserve professionalism. Your dreams don't require everyone's approval. Adversity has a way of exposing things. It exposes unhealthy expectations. It exposes misplaced trust. It exposes where we've been seeking validation. And most importantly, it exposes our character. I could have allowed these experiences to make me bitter. Instead, I decided to allow them to make me wiser. I learned to protect my peace, to celebrate quietly when necessary, to keep moving without needing everyone to applaud, to understand that misunderstanding is sometimes a part of growth. Maybe you've experienced something familiar. You made the best decision you could with the information you had, and someone misunderstood it. Someone questioned your motives. Someone created a narrative that wasn't true. Don't let someone else's interpretation become your identity. Know your heart. God knows your heart. And sometimes that's enough. I discovered that adversity has potential not because adversity is enjoyable, because it develops qualities that comfort never could: wisdom, discernment, resilience, boundaries, humility, strength. The goal isn't to avoid adversity, the goal is to become better because of it. Every challenge carries a lesson, every disappointment offers perspective, every setback has the potential to prepare you for what's next. Adversity didn't stop my growth, it refined it. And perhaps the greatest lesson adversity ever taught me is that not every closed door is rejection. Sometimes it's protection, sometimes it's preparation, and sometimes it's simply pointing you toward your field. Chapter 7, Bloom Anyway. The story of Darylyn D. Broussard Copeman. What if the field isn't just for a select few? What if it has been waiting for all of us? We've talked about the pot. We've talked about the fear and comfort, the anxiety. We've talked about purpose. Let's talk about what happens when people choose to grow anyway. Not because life suddenly became easy, or every obstacle disappeared, or every dream unfolded exactly as they planned. They bloomed anyway. Growth doesn't ask for perfect conditions. Flowers don't wait until every cloud disappears before they bloom. They grow through rain, through wind, through storms, and somehow they still reach toward the light. The person you're about to meet made a decision. She refused to let fear have the final word. It's the story of my baby sister, Darylyn. This fall, she graduates from nursing school. That degree represents more than classes, clinicals, and exams. It represents perseverance, the late nights, sacrifices, determination, moments of wondering if she could finish, and the decision to keep going anyway. I wanted her story to be a part of this documentary because growth deserves to be celebrated. Not just when people cross the finish line, but for every unseen step it took to get there. That's what blooming looks like. Not perfection, progress, not having it all together, but choosing to move forward. Maybe your bloom won't look like a diploma. Maybe it looks like asking for help or healing from a relationship. Maybe starting over, forgiving yourself, and finally believing that you're worthy. Whatever your bloom looks like, celebrate it. Because comparison has stolen enough joy. Your field does not have to look like someone else's. Your timeline doesn't have to match theirs. Your purpose doesn't have to sound like theirs. Your bloom is still beautiful. If there's one thing I hope you take away from this journey, it's this. Don't wait for the perfect conditions before you decide to grow. Don't wait until you're fearless or someone gives you permission or every question has been answered. Bloom anyway. The world doesn't need another copy of someone else. It needs you, fully healed, authentic, committed to becoming who you were created to be. One day, someone will look at your life and find the courage to change theirs, not because you were perfect, but because you were willing to leave the pot, willing to step into the field, and willing to bloom. So as you leave this documentary, I want to leave you with the same question we began with. What part of your life have you outgrown? And what are you waiting for? The field has always been there. Now it's your turn. Go and grow. Chapter 8, Finding Your Field. There comes a moment when you stop asking, what do I want to be? And you begin asking, what was I created to do? For a long time, I believed my purpose was attached to my profession. I thought if my job changed, my purpose changed. If a title was taken away, maybe my purpose had disappeared too. But I discovered something freeing. Purpose is bigger than a position. Purpose is bigger than a paycheck. Purpose is bigger than a title. Purpose travels with you. Stepping into purpose has not been easy. There have been moments of uncertainty, moments of sacrifice, moments when I questioned whether if I was making the right decisions. Purpose doesn't eliminate challenges, it gives meaning to them. Today, I know what fulfills me. I love helping people. Sometimes that means helping families understand how to advocate for a child with a disability. Sometimes it means encouraging someone to apply for the job they don't think they'll get. Sometimes it means reminding someone that their life isn't over because they made a mistake. Sometimes it simply means listening. Sometimes it means speaking hope into a situation that feels hopeless. My spiritual gift is exhortation. That means I encourage, I strengthen, I remind people of what's possible. Whenever God gives me an opportunity to help someone move forward, I try to be faithful to that assignment because I've learned that purpose isn't something you turn on and off, it's something you live. Purpose doesn't always look spectacular. Sometimes purpose is a quiet conversation, a handwritten note, a phone call, a classroom, a hospital room, a kitchen table, a church pew, a community meeting. Purpose shows up wherever people need hope. You don't have to become someone else to live with purpose. You simply have to become more fully yourself, the person God created you to be, not the version shaped by fear, comparison, or other people's expectations. The real you. So let me ask you something. Do you know your purpose? What have you been placed on this earth to do? When do you feel most alive? What kind of work fills your spirit even when it challenges you? What burden do you carry that keeps drawing your heart back? Whose life becomes better because you showed up? Maybe your purpose is to teach. Maybe it's to build. Maybe it's to create. Maybe your purpose is to serve, to lead, to encourage, to heal. Maybe it's to innovate, to protect, or to give. Whatever it is, the world needs it. Your purpose does not have to look like mine. It doesn't have to look like anyone else's. Comparison is one of the quickest ways to lose sight of your calling. Someone else's assignment was never meant to become your identity. The field is big enough for all of us. There is room for your gifts, your voice, your ideas, your story, and most importantly, there is room for you. The goal was never to become someone else. The goal was always to become who you were created to be. Because when you finally find your field, you stop surviving. You start flourishing. And when you flourish, you give others permission to do the same. That's the beauty of growth. It never ends with you. It reaches the people whose lives you'll touch simply because you had the courage to become who you were created to be. It's never too late to become who God created you to be. Delayed is not denied. Your timeline is not your identity. Keep growing, keep believing, keep blooming.